And a very good evening to you, and you're very welcome to another edition of the Green Zone Conversations with Eugene Doyle here on this Monday's webinar. And I thank you for joining us here this evening on the webinar. Now, let's just find out what we're actually doing here. So, as the Oireachtas Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade carry out pre-legislative scrutiny on the Israeli settlements in the Occupied Palestinian Territory, Prohibition of Importation of Goods Bill 2025. First of all, it wasn't straightforward for the opposition to the bill in the form of the Ireland-Israel Alliance and the JRCI to get into the Dáil Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee room to present their witness statements against what's now become the Pigs Bill. But they did get in, they did. Now, that happened last week in the Oireachtas at the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee that's chaired by John Lahart. Now, okay, so on this week's, we're going to discuss what the bill is about, why is the IIA and the JRCI against the bill, what damage could it do to our relationship with the US, and is this bill for enactment just another act of anti-Semitism? Now, this week's guests are Maurice Cohen, who's chair of the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland, or JRCI, who was a member of that delegation that presented witness statements on the bill at the Dáil Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee last week. And I'm also joined by Marco Alexander, an Irishman, living and working and has a family in Jerusalem, and he joins us live from Jerusalem. And I want to welcome both Maurice and indeed Marco. You're very welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene.
Now, I suppose for viewers' sake, Maurice, I'm going to start with you, and I'm just going to ask you, what is the Jewish Representative Council of Ireland?
The council has been around almost 100 years, and we are the voice of the community. We try to be the voice for everybody in the community, but like all other councils, we obviously can't speak for everybody, but I certainly believe we speak for most people. And we're also the liaison between the community and the government and security with the Gardaí, etc.
And Maurice, as far as numbers of Jewish people, Irish people living in Ireland, what are we talking about in numbers, roughly?
Do you want the short answer or the long answer, Eugene?
Well, you can go somewhere in between. That's even fine, you know?
Okay. Well, according to the last census, there was just under 2,500 Jewish people. But one has to qualify that because one doesn't have to, there's no compulsion to put down one's religion in the census form. Neither is there a checkbox. So many people just don't bother putting it down. I do know that from the amount of people that are coming into the country, Jewish people that are coming into the country, and the fact that they're in every county in Ireland, I would almost hazard a guess that if 2,500 say they're Jewish, it could even be double that. So it may even be as high as 5,000.
Okay, before we continue on, I just want to do some housekeeping here just for our viewers. And I just want to ask them if they're here throughout this webinar, which should go on for about an hour and a quarter. And I know Maurice might not be here for the entire duration of it, and that's fine. But if you want to drop a comment into the chat box, all you have to do is just drop a comment in. You'll see the chat box there as you look at the screen there. You'll see that and drop a comment on whatever you think of what is being discussed here this evening. Now, you can also, and I'd like you to do it if you could, is subscribe to the channel for more insights as we go along. And also, if you could, I'd be grateful if you could like and share this webinar and the Green Zone Conversations with Eugene Doyle. Now, so Maurice, back to you then in relation to I'm going to come to your contribution to the Oireachtas in more detail a little later on. But you did say that Jews were fearful. Is that obviously is very much heightened since October 7th?
Absolutely. When one looks at what is being said, online. It is very, very frightening. And the best advice that I can give people in the community is really to stay offline. But there's threats about anybody who tries to give a narrative that isn't the accepted pro-Palestinian narrative in Ireland. And I must just preface that when I say that isn't the pro-Palestinian narrative. As I said in the Dáil the other day, and I said again here now, that I personally and anybody I know in the community, we all just want the Palestinians and the Israelis to be able to live in peace and harmony side by side to one another. So we really have everybody's well-being at heart. And I think there's often the perception in Ireland that if one has a pro-Israeli narrative, it means you have a negative narrative towards the Palestinians, and that just isn't true. I wish I could say the same the opposite way, and I'm not so sure that I can. But as far as we're concerned, we just want peace, and we want to see that the Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace.
Now, Maurice, you did say in your contribution, and we're going to play a clip of it in a moment, you did say in your contribution that this bill will do more to give energy to the fanatics, if you like. I'm not quoting you directly, but the fanatics in this thing, and so much so that on Friday night we did actually see an attack on a Jewish person in Ireland on a bus in Dublin, did we not?
Yes, indeed. There was a clip of it that went viral around the world, absolutely around the globe, and it was a man who was obviously drunk, and he just kept saying to this person, "You're a genocidal Jew, you're a genocidal Jew." Now, I don't know whether that person was a visitor to the country. I suspect he was working here, and I also suspect that he may have taken out Irish citizenship. But the term genocidal Jew should not be applied to somebody living here, shouldn't be applied to anybody. But it certainly shouldn't be applied to somebody who is thousands of miles away from the conflict. And it indicates how the rhetoric that we see in Irish media and in the Oireachtas, both the Dáil and the Senate, can have repercussions. And that's one of the reasons we're fearful, because of things like this.
Now, Mark, I'll just turn to you for a moment for a comment, because I know that in Jerusalem they were aware of this attack on a Jewish person in Ireland on Friday. What's your understanding of it, or what's your take, or what's the Israeli take on that?
Well, I don't think it comes as a surprise to anyone, to be perfectly honest, if one considers the present climate in Ireland and relations between the two countries. That isn't to say that it reflects the views of the man in the street, but certainly the sensation is that there's something seriously wrong. The political and cultural climate in Ireland is all too clear for most people here. So that's all I can really say about that at the moment, and we can delve into this matter further during the course of the conversation.
Eugene, can I come just in here? What Mark is saying about the perception, and this is very, very important, I think, Marco and Eugene. I had a gentleman who was born in Dublin, and I was speaking to him. He's a very well-known surgeon in Israel, and he said to me he wouldn't allow his adult son to come back to Dublin to see his grandmother, this man's mother, And I said, why? He said, oh, well, he could be arrested. And I said, where are you getting that from? So I said, he's not going to be arrested. What's he going to get arrested for, walking in the streets or being Jewish? No, of course not. But it indicates the way what we do here gets magnified around the world, and it isn't good for Ireland, Inc. And I totally agree with you, Marco. The perception is vastly different to the actuality.
Yes, yes. I think people, the Irish people, certainly my recollection of the Irish people, are a well-meaning, fair-minded people. That was my experience growing up in Ireland. Of course, Maurice, you're more au fait with what's going on because I left Ireland in the mid-'80s. But certainly I never encountered any serious episodes of anti-Semitism. Whilst I say that, it must be borne in mind that the state, the Irish state, has never been on particularly friendly terms with Israel. So we have this kind of dissonance between the man in the street, as it were, and the state.
Yes, in many ways that's true, but one does have to point out to the fact that Jewish people were the only ones that were named in the Constitution, other than Catholic.
Certainly.
One definitely would have to point that out. It is important, but then there's lots of other things on the opposite side as well.
Yes.
Yeah. There has never been in our lifetimes major anti-Semitism in as much as what one would term overt anti-Semitism.
Certainly,
I think when we look at what's happening now, that there has been an underlying, there's been a covert anti-Semitism, and that has come to the fore. It's starting to become overt. But also, there's an expression that's being used across Europe, and I think it's very palpable now. There's what I'd like to term ambient anti-Semitism. And ambient anti-Semitism is neither covert or overt, but it's there in the background.
Indeed.
And perhaps, unfortunately, that the only ones who see it and feel it are the Jews and the Jewish community. It is ambient, it's there, it's like a background noise against us. And people don't understand that. And when we hear, as the chair of the committee the other day said, oh, there's nobody here that is anti-Semitic, and there's nobody in the Dáil that's anti-Semitic. And when the President of Ireland told me personally a year ago that there isn't one person who is anti-Semitic in the whole of Ireland, I'm thinking they just don't get the ambient anti-Semitism.
I think it goes beyond that, Maurice, because I think, you know, even if people aren't consciously anti-Semitic, they become anti-Semitic once they're functionally anti-Semitic. I don't really accept the argument that it is legitimate to criticize Israel when Israel becomes their obsessive focus of attention. So I'm a little bit more wary of that.
Well, I don't think we ever say here, certainly I don't say it, I've always said it's not anti-Semitic to criticize Israel or the government of Israel, so long as it doesn't become obsessive, and so long as it isn't the frenzy that we're seeing now. And it can't be, if you're not going to criticize other people for the same things, well, then it starts becoming anti-Semitic.
Indeed. Yeah,
but Maurice, it has become, it is obsessive on Israel. I mean, we've a war on our borders of Europe. We've a war there. You mentioned it in your I think it was you mentioned it in your contribution to the Oireachtas, that, you know, the various places where in China and Tibet, or not China and Tibet, China and what's the
Myanmar and Russia,
in Nepal,
Nigeria.
No, I'm saying the conflict that China's having with the
Uyghurs, the Turkic Islamic population.
Like, there's no mention of them.
No mention
at all in Ireland. No mention of them, and it is so. I mean, it is totally obsessive about Israel and what's going on there. Are we?
That
Are
is
we?
the point. Sorry, Eugene. That is the point I'm making. That is the point I'm making. Yeah.
But should we in Ireland not just say it as it is, that it is anti-Semitic, and it's not?
Yes.
It's not a criticism of Israel.
It is function. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Maurice.
Well, again, that's what we do say, that when it is obsessive and then it becomes anti-Semitic. But one is entitled to criticize Israel if you feel that they're doing something wrong. That's fine. But when you don't criticize other people and you're obsessing on them daily, I mean, if you even look at the UN over the last number of years, there's more criticism of UN than all other countries put together. It's just ludicrous.
Yes, but the perception of what is wrong is due to a self-induced, distorted picture. I think this is a very important point that we have to make here. The perceptions of Israel are due to the fact that what has been practiced upon the Irish people, and not just the Irish people, is a phony narrative which has been going on for decades. So people can't really formulate proper judgments in this climate. There is no balance in information.
Okay, and we're going to get into a little bit more of that, because we're going to just turn to that bill, the Israeli settlements in the occupied territory, in brackets, Prohibition of Importation of Goods Bill 2025. Now, Maurice, would you just, for viewers' sake, would you just explain in layman's language what that actually means if it was enacted?
If it was enacted, it would mean that anybody who purchased anything from the settlements or East Jerusalem, which apparently we're labeling as a settlement, and imported it into this country, then it would be seen to be a criminal act, subject to either 4 or 5 years imprisonment and up to €250,000 fine. The problem is, of course, that there's many aspects of this which haven't been thought through, because people could just be in Jerusalem. They could be buying a souvenir, which may very well have been made in one of the industrial areas that the settlements are involved in. And in fact, there could very well be Palestinian workers there. So if you bought a trinket and you tried to bring it back, you could be breaking the law here in Ireland. It goes, the ridiculousness of the whole bill even goes further, in as much as if the item was shipped to anywhere else in Europe, or for that matter, either in Britain, then there's an added problem, because one could, in effect, purchase it from France or Germany or Greece, or it could go into Britain, from Britain, or which could go into Northern Ireland and could come down here. And there is really no way of knowing where it was purchased. It's only when, if my recollection is correct, because remember, at the moment, it's only the heads of the bill are published. The actual detail is not published. But when we don't really know, where if you buy it inside Europe, as opposed to buying it directly in East Jerusalem or the settlements, whether that is still a criminal act. And this is basically a boycott bill. Now, where that even goes further from Ireland's point of view is the law in America is such that in 36 states, if you're affiliated or from any of those 36 states, any company that's from there, if you are involved in another country that has a boycott against somebody that the US does not boycott, then you're subject to huge fines and legal problems, etc. So none of this has been looked at. It hasn't been thought through at all. And the only thing that this bill does is create problems. We've spent a lot of time in it in the Dáil and in the Seanad, when there's many pressing problems at home. And the main thing to remember, the main thing is that it will not in any way better the lives of one Palestinian person whatsoever, or for that matter, one Israeli person.
Can I make 2 points on that? One is that you say there's no thought put into this bill. Could I suggest, and be bold to suggest here, that there's no thought put into this bill because it is designed out of pure and utter hatred? Is that over the top?
Well, I don't know whether it's designed over because of hatred. I really don't know that. All I can say, it's designed. It may be designed out of the incorrect conclusion that it would give the Palestinians some sort of hope that their lives would be better, and that Ireland is rooting for them. However, that's another thing I must totally disagree with, because giving the Palestinians hope in this way, just as we give them funds, or as we give UNRWA funds, is really not getting at the root of the problem at all. And that's either a further conversation now or a different conversation. We are not getting at the roots of the problem.
Okay, and Marco, the total amount involved in of imports, I believe, between 20 and 24, that's a 5-year period, is 675,000 euros. Is
yes,
what's involved.
Indeed,
What
we're
is,
talking.
from what you can see of the bill, what is Israel's view on what Ireland is doing?
Well, it's certainly seen as something very malicious in the best case scenario. It from a juridical point of view, it is a pretty useless piece of legislation, probably inapplicable. But it is signaling certainly a hostility towards Israel by the government. I don't think there can be any shadow of doubt with regard to that. What it does is it feeds into the phony Palestinist narrative, which has taken hold among the chattering classes. That is my opinion. Unfortunately, the Irish people haven't been informed, or have been misinformed by certain actors throughout the course of the years. The analogy has been created between the Irish struggle, the justifiable struggle for independence from the British, and the struggle of the so-called Palestinian people, which didn't exist up until very recently. Because as I've mentioned many a time, nobody spoke about the Palestinian people until 1964. Okay? When the partition plan was proposed, the Arabs and not the Palestinians would have had not only Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, for those who don't understand this term, but also 45% of Israel within the 1967 borders. So essentially speaking, this bill is predicated on falsehood. And I think this is important for the Irish people to understand, that they've had the wool pulled over their eyes. And I think we need to understand what's happening here, because I think Palestinism is a problem that's going to affect the Irish in ways which they don't fully understand at the moment. But I think the unrest which is happening in Ireland, I think people will begin to connect the dots. There is no dispute in terms of territory between Ireland and Israel. There never has been. The Jews have certainly consistently been very favorable and helped Ireland in its struggle for independence. So there's no reason for anything of this sort to exist. There are malicious actors on the scene, and I think we have to accept the possibility that these people do exist, and they're working to sour relationships between two ancient peoples.
Marco, sorry, no, I just go back to Maurice for a moment. Maurice, normally what happens is various interest groups, when for pre-legislative discussion, are invited in to the Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee. Now, that was not the case in the IIA, that's the Ireland-Israel Alliance, and indeed the JCRI, of which you are the chair. You guys had to apply. Now, I'm going to throw this out there. I'm going to say to you, does that not indicate straight off that this is a one-sided, pre-legislative scrutiny?
Yes, I'll answer that question. Then I'll go back to a few things that Marco was saying, if you don't mind, Eugene.
Absolutely.
It certainly seems to be that the committee are trying to determine an outcome which has actually been predetermined. I think the government wants to get this bill passed. I believe that it's to do with the fact that they believe that the people actually want this bill to be passed. My own view is that despite the fact that you see people marching on the streets, which are well orchestrated, though these marches, I believe the vast majority of people, perhaps 97% of them, really want the government to get on with the matters at hand, to look after the welfare of the Irish citizens and the people living here. I think also that there was a poll in the Irish Times last Friday whereby you see there has been a swing away from this, and caution is now is certainly now being pushed. And that poll was done on the Monday and Tuesday of last week. On the Tuesday, we were at the committee stages, so I doubt if anybody would have heard us and then been polled. But more importantly, on the Thursday, there was Fergal O'Brien of IBEC, and he, on no uncertain terms, though he was being pushed by virtually every member of the committee to try and shoehorn what he was saying into the fact that this would have no bearing on Ireland's economic climate, when he was saying it would, or more than likely would. The committee were trying to find a way that his words would be compliant, so that they could push the bill. Now, not only that, but it was very interesting that Dan O'Brien, a respected economist, who was due to be called in the next day, was due to be there on the Thursday as well, was disinvited. And he was disinvited because the committee would have suddenly discovered that he didn't speak for any organization. He was only speaking on his own behalf as a well-known economist and well-respected economist. But more to the point, anybody who's going to speak has to submit their opening remarks. And being conspiratorial, I am wondering whether those opening remarks were not aligned with those of the committee, and they found an excuse. Now, I've no way of knowing this. As I say, I'm being conspiratorial.
We'll let the viewers.
I don't need to be casting aspersions on anybody.
Go ahead, Maurice. Go ahead.
So this does certainly look like that they really wanted the witnesses to come in, and they wanted them to say this is why this bill should go in, and this is should be passed, and this is how it can be passed, and it's legal, etc. They didn't want a dissenting voice. Now, that's the way it appears to me. We weren't invited, neither were the IIA. We had to go and request to be invited. Now, this is indicative absolutely indicative of the climate here in Ireland, where there is only one narrative. And I've always said, as the chairperson of the Jewish Representative Council, what we are most against is the fact that the Israeli narrative, whether you agree with it or not, is not allowed any airtime. It's shut down in our universities. The university should be the place where one listens to somebody with an opposing view and one learns how to deal with that and debate that. But no, we're shutting it down. Now, that's not just in Ireland, as you well know, but it is very seldom that anybody with a pro-Israel narrative is invited onto the television or the radio. And we were seeing that in the committee. And I also know, I know there is many TDs and senators that would have a different view to the prevailing narrative, but they won't stand up and say it because either they're not allowed by the party or they're afraid of the consequences, not with their voters, but they're afraid of the consequences that they'll be cancelled either online. And of course, we did have this where there was a Jewish Israeli woman who's been in Ireland many years who wanted to stand for the Dún Laoghaire Council. And when she said, look, there is another narrative, she was basically kicked out of the party.
So it's not only cancelled by online; it's cancelled by their own parties.
By their own parties, yes.
They could easily be.
Yeah.
Now, before I bring Mark on this, and in a moment I'm going to play a clip from your contribution. But I want to give you a chance, Maurice, because you did say you wanted to pick up on one or two points that Marco raised.
Yeah. You mentioned, Marco, about the narrative where the Irish kicked out the British. Well, certainly when I was going to school, the narrative was the Irish kicked out the British and the Jewish people kicked out the British as well. So it was much more aligned in those days.
Exactly.
And also, there was the case of Jabotinsky, an Israeli man.
Absolutely.
He came over here to speak to the Irish parliamentarians to see how they did it. How did the Irish kick out the British? And was there any lessons to be learned for the Jewish people who were
indeed they were inspired. They were inspired by the Irish.
And in fact, I think it was it Shamir, Marco?
Mike, that's right. Perfectly right.
His nom de guerre was Michael, after Michael Collins.
That is right. There was
much so that's one thing I wanted to say to you. But also, and we'll probably come back to this, that the bill is just virtue signaling, in my opinion, which does nobody any good. But the other thing, which is quite amazing, for many years we have been hearing how we have learned from our peace process in Northern Ireland and how those learnings can be applied to other worldwide conflicts. And we had hoped that we here in Ireland would be at the table when the Palestinians and the Israelis sat down. And there is no way, and I don't understand how our politicians don't see this, there is no way, having taken the side so strongly of one side, that they will be sitting at any mediation table. And the ludicrous thing about it is that one of the learnings from Northern Ireland is the first thing you have to do is let both sides and encourage both sides to get together and find out from the other side what their problems really are, and then go talk about that. And seeing if you can move on from there. Remember, it took us about 20 years to do that.
Right. But I would have to add, for the sake of truthfulness, that the analogy is in reality a disanalogy between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, because neither of the two sides were genocidal in nature. Palestinism, from its very beginning, was and is a genocidal ideology. And I've studied this for many years. All one has to do is thoroughly look at the sources, look at what's going on in the PA authority now, what they broadcast on their television stations, because this bears a direct relation to what Hamas perpetrated on the 7th of October. And the people can access this very easily. What happens in the PA, in the Palestinian Authority, is qualitatively no different and perhaps worse than what the Nazis did. And certainly what Hamas did goes further than the Nazis, because not only did they perpetrate the atrocities, they broadcasted them as well, whereas the Nazis tried to hide them. So I think it's very important. And I think we have to stop pussyfooting. With that, the time has to come where we lance the boil, Maurice. We have to say these things. The pus has to be released. I know it's going to get on many people's faces, but we need to say these things. In 1948, the nascent Jewish state settled for very little. The Arab state was offered 45% of what is pre-1967 Israel. They launched numerous wars, and bear in mind that the surrounding Arab countries used Palestinism as a pretext. We have to be able to say these things. We mustn't shy away from speaking these which for many people are unpleasant truths. They had many opportunities. Israel did not control Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, in 1967. There has to come a point where we don't just invoke a phony conception of international law, but speak about natural law, a type of law which articulates moral constructs and expresses justice. How many times do you give people a chance to destroy you and refund them in the course of the years? Because this has been the folly of Israeli governments. They thought they could buy peace by ceding, and what they only got was war.
Mark, can I just come in there? I think one of the things that people don't know, in my view, is that that is responsible for what we're seeing. And you mentioned the ideology, and I think you're absolutely correct. There's been some tremendous work done by an NGO called Impact SE. And anybody, and if there are any viewers that want to do this, they can go onto their website, Impact SE, because what they do is they monitor the school books. And they've actually done the same for Ireland, but they monitor the school books of all the Arab states. And they've monitored 4 or 5 countries in Europe. And the one that stands out to be the worst of them all is what is taught by UNRWA in Gaza. They're absolutely horrendous, and I would urge people to go and look at those reports from Impact SE, because the kids are being radicalized almost from the time they're born. In fact, to me, it amounts to child abuse, the way they are, they go to the summer camps and they're 4 or 5 years old and they're trained to be suicide bombers and terrorists from that age.
Maurice, can I just, before I want to play a clip of this of your contribution shortly, but before I go there, I sent both of you an interview done on Community Radio Kilkenny City last Friday, a 20-minute interview done on Senator Francis Black coming to Kilkenny for a meeting tonight in Kilkenny, and there was 2 representatives from pro-Palestinian group in Kilkenny, and what the things that were allowed, not allowed to be said, I mean, the things that were said in that interview, is Marco not right when he says that it is time to not stop sugarcoating this, because that is only an example, what I sent you, that is only an example of what mainstream media allow to come on our airwaves, and there is no pushback, really. Is Marco not right that we need to stop sugarcoating this and basically fight back?
Well, Eugene, you're now talking about something different, in my opinion, and you probably have heard me speak about this before. To get one's message across is quite a difficult task, and it's not just a matter of saying it. And I think when you look at the pro-Palestinian narrative as it is and as it's taken hold in the world, A, it's taken many, many years, B, it was planned, and C, it was well funded. And the psychology behind it is quite incredible. So just stating what you have said just then, unfortunately, it is my belief that it is not enough to change people's minds, whether it's true or not. And I believe most of what you said, if not all of what you said, is true. But the psychology of getting the message across is very, very important. Just saying it means sometimes you just find that the person that you're trying to get through to clams up. I think we've got to hear both sides, and I think that's what we should be pushing. Please allow us to have our narrative, allow the other side to have the narrative, because it is never healthy. Let me just come back to the committee for one moment. To a man on that committee, there wasn't one dissenting voice, not one. And that's bad for any group of people. When they all agree with one another, there is a problem. And the problem could be manifested by various different things. But a groupthink is never good, never.
And that's why here on the Green Zone that we that's the one thing about these conversations is that we don't all agree on the one thing, and we give our own side to it. And that's what's really powerful about a webinar like the Green Zone and others, that we allow people to differ from the opinions by conversating, by speaking about it. Now, Maurice, I just want to play. I hope I'm going to do this right now. It's my first time to do this. Share this, so I'm going to share just a clip of your contribution to the Oireachtas Committee on Foreign Affairs and Trade last week. And let me see, can I get it going here?
It will not reform the ineffective leadership of the Palestinian Authority. It will not foster dialogue between Israelis and Palestinians, nor improve the lot of the Palestinians economically or socially. It certainly will not bring peace any sooner. It is, as some have described, a symbolism, a gesture. And while gestures can have their place in these circumstances, especially ones that carry legal, diplomatic and social consequences, they should never be passed off as national policy or strategy in the pursuit of our vital interests. Let me be very clear. I speak as an Irish citizen born and raised here in Dublin, and as a Jew from a small, long-established Irish Jewish community that arrived here in the early 1600s. And that community is now increasingly fearful. We are witnessing a rise in racism and its not too distant relative antisemitism across Europe, yes, but also right here in Ireland. And while this bill may not set out to target Jews or Jewish life, its message is unmistakably felt by us. One of my best friends, with whom I went to school, a long-time respected member of the Jewish community, whose grandfather was the only citizen murdered in the 1916 Rising, said to me only 2 days ago, "I always thought of myself as an Irishman who happened to be Jewish. Now, I know I'm just a Jew living in Ireland."
Now, Maurice, I thought that particular statement about that your friend made, I thought that was very, very telling. Very well put as well by you. I have to say your contribution was very, very good to that committee. But I thought that statement was very telling, that this person once felt that they were an Irishman, and they were a Jew. but now they were a Jew living in Ireland. I thought that was very telling, and that's a very dangerous place to be, is it not?
It is. I mean, you know, we all think ourselves as Irish. You know, we're it's as simple as that. We're Irish. It doesn't matter what our religion is, and we have obviously a spiritual affinity and a cultural affinity, and even a shared memory to another piece of land, another country, Israel. And many people do now. The fact, I think nearly 15 or 20% of the people here are immigrants over the last 15, 20 years. So many people are going to have an affinity to different countries. We may have been one of the few that led the way, though there were other people from outside the country as well. And it is terrible, because you get into you get into the feel of the country when you come here after being here a few years. I've no doubt, though, I'm born here and my grandparents are here over 100 years, but it shifts our thoughts, and we just have to wonder why we're feeling like that. And we're being othered. It's as simple as that. We are really being othered, instead of being an Irish person. There was a man from Cork. His name was David Marcus. He was a writer, the late David Marcus, and he put it very succinctly, and I never quite agreed with it, but I do now. And he said, we're hyphenated Jews betwixt Sean and Shem. I thought it was it's a lovely way of putting it, and it's more apt now. And yeah, that we're hyphenated.
Now, before I ask you about, and I'll talk to Marco as well about this from an Israeli point of view. Let me just play a clip from former Minister for Justice Alan Shatter, who is on the board of the Ireland-Israel Alliance, and was also the first chairman of that committee on foreign affairs and trade. He was one of the founding members of it. He actually made a contribution as well in there, and let me see, can I get it up here? Yeah, I should be able to get it to share screen, and here we go.
Now turn to Mr. Alan Shatter.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to briefly address members of this committee, of which I was a founding member and past chairman. I'm here today representing the Ireland-Israel Alliance, together with Natasha Hausdorff, a distinguished English barrister and expert on European and international law, who is a member of UK Lawyers for Israel. In my limited time slot, I focus on the substantive provisions and politics of the draft Prohibition on the Importation of Goods Bill. A more detailed analysis of the bill is contained in the Alliance's 8th of July joint written submission with UK lawyers, and in my own submission of the same date. The bill is essentially a sectarian measure based on falsehoods, riddled with obscurity and anomalies, detached from historical, religious and present-day reality, and abandons all lessons learned in our own peace process. While most of the discussion so far has focused on the relevance of EU and international law to the bill and its possible extension to services, the actual specifics of it and its enforceability have received little attention. It is that on which I focus, and Natasha will address the former matters. The bill's central proposition is to prohibit, and I quote, the importation of goods originating in an Israeli settlement, wrongly depicted by the bill's preamble as an international law obligation. The goods targeted are deemed by the the goods targeted are deemed by the preamble to be maintaining what it obscurely and wrongly describes as the illegal situation created by Israel in the occupied Palestinian territory. Even if the illegal situation depiction is accepted as accurate, as it is now known that the total value of commercial goods so imported in the 5-year period 2020 to 2024 came to €685,000, no credibility attaches to the proposition that such imports maintain anything.
Okay, so just on that point, Marco, I want to take up that point with you there. There's been a lot that Taoiseach has said as well here, that this bill is largely symbolic, right? So, what does that mean? What does that mean to you when you hear people saying that this it's a symbolic gesture?
Well, the Taoiseach is playing to the gallery. So, symbolic aspects do have meaning. They do have consequences. They are a declaration of something. And in this case, it is a hostile declaration. It cannot be but perceived in that way. It is misconceived. It shows a wanton and perverse disregard for any notion of natural justice. But unfortunately, the Taoiseach and from what I can gather, many of the TDs have put up the force field to logic and reason.
And Maurice, just going back to the committee, the questioning afterwards. Tell me, can you kind of sum up the kind of the mood of TDs and senators towards Natasha and the rest of you who would have answered questions? What was the mood like in the meeting afterwards?
Well, it was quite ludicrous. The questions, I think we had 4 questions where they tried to insist we answer yes or no. So they were what I call, and I'm sure you've heard of, when did you stop beating your wife questions?
Yes.
And I basically refused to answer, and so did the others. And Alan did try and answer, and he tried to say why he was saying something. And one of the TDs, I believe it was, I can't quite recall, so I won't say his name. But one of the TDs certainly was talking over him and not allowing him to answer. And the chairperson wasn't keeping the TD in order to say, you've asked a question, now the question ought to be answered. And it was almost laughable. Instead of being laudable, it was laughable.
Just on the whole issue of Natasha's contribution, she is a very well respected lawyer, is she not? She's for the lawyers, for UK Lawyers for Israel. She was very distinct and very clear in her summation of the bill, wasn't she?
Yeah, she's a brilliant international lawyer, and she since I'm not a lawyer, I can't say, but I presume she knows the law very well. I think she made one point which may have been lost on a lot of people, that when one talks about the UN said this, or the Amnesty said that, or the ICJ said that, her point, and I certainly it didn't get lost on me, was that these are all political decisions. They are not legal decisions. They're not international law. And I think that the Western world in particular has made the mistake of believing them to be legal opinions. It's just like the ICJ opinion was only an opinion, and it has therefore Ireland has been saying, because of this ruling by the ICJ, we must take action against anybody that is genocidal. And it's an opinion. It is not a ruling, and opinions do not have to be acted upon. And I think we totally missed that.
Marco, what was your view? What's your view on the whole proceedings of this scrutiny of this bill?
Well, it can only be described as something akin to a kangaroo court. There was no attempt to admit evidence, to admit facts, to admit any notion of history. It was a setup job, and I think Maurice encapsulated that.
I think, can I also tell you about an incident afterwards, Eugene, which Mark may not know and the viewers may not know. The following day, there was a short video, less than 2 minutes, which was put out, I understand, by Fianna Fáil. Certainly, I think it was on their Twitter account. And it showed the chair speaking, and then it showed both Alan and I being asked one of the questions.
Yes or no questions.
Sorry?
Yes or no questions.
Yes, yes or no questions. And actually, this particular one wasn't quite a yes or no question. It was, did we believe that this bill was motivated by anti-Semitism? And Alan gave a very good answer, but his answer was cut. And then the chairperson turned to me and asked me the same question. And I do recall thinking at the time, very carefully, I waited 2 or 3 seconds to gather my thoughts before I answered. And generally speaking, I like to give short answers, though you may not believe so, listening in the last hour. And the answer I gave is, when I was asked the question, did I think this was motivated by anti-Semitism? I said, that may very well be the consequence. However, I didn't believe that the bill was motivated by anti-Semitism. And my answer was cut out as well. So even afterwards, there was an attempt to denigrate our contribution.
And Maurice, do you honestly believe that the bill is not motivated by anti-Semitism?
Well, I've no evidence that it is motivated by anti-Semitism. I think it is motivated by an incorrect view that it will do some good for the Palestinians, which I totally disagree with. I mean, we even had a statement today of 20 countries, and just while we were talking, there was information on it came into me. Ireland, of course, was one of the signatories to this statement, and the first person to praise this was Hamas. And I think you always know when Hamas are out there praising you, as they did the moment we made, we recognized the Palestinians currently as a state last year. They were the first ones. And when you have a situation where Hamas, who haven't had an election in 19 years or 18 years, when you have that situation, then you know you've done something wrong, in my opinion.
Now, I want to put this to both of you because, and it comes back on the on Marco saying that, you know, we should no longer sugarcoat the situation in relation to the reality on the ground in Israel, in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, and others, that we should no longer sugarcoat it. And Maurice has his own opinion on that. Doesn't necessarily agree that that's the way to go, because it's allowing us to be heard, allowing this side to be heard. Now, I put it to both of you. I watched a video of a march that took place, a Muslim march that took place from Christchurch to the GPO, to the center of our freedom, the central building to our freedom from Britain. And one imam at that march spoke to the crowd, and he said, and I quote, he said, this is our land, this is our country, and we love this, we love here more than any other Irish. The reason I'm putting that, I'm quoting that, is to say to you is that, is this situation where the narrative is all one-sided, is that only going to get worse because of incompatible cultures in our country? Is that only going to get worse? And therefore, what if Maurice doesn't agree, and he's absolutely entitled not to agree with Marco in relation to not sugarcoating it, but is it not only going to get worse? I'll go to you first, Marco, on that one, and just see what do you think of that?
Okay, well, what you see there is all the elements that are basically have an aversion to Western society and to nation states coalescing around the Palestinist flag. Palestinism is essentially jihadi movement. Very often I've said that Palestinism is the retrovirus which is weakening the immune system of nation states. That is the underlying motor behind Palestinism, except you haven't understood it fully yet. That is the problem. The metaphysics, to use a philosophical term, of Palestinism is extending Islamic control over other people's land. Okay, now I know people are going to say, but there were many Christians in the Palestinist movement. There were some indeed, but these were the useful idiots of Palestinism who basically have contributed to the destruction of Christian civilization in the Middle East. So essentially speaking, what these people are trying to do, and it's a tried and tested formula, and they're probing and they're trying to see how far they can get. And slowly but surely, they are taking over the national symbols of the Irish nation. I believe it was from Christchurch, am I correct in saying
That's
so?
correct,
to the GPO, two central pillars of the Irish modern narrative. Okay, so this isn't done by chance. This is a tried and tested formula. Now, I'm not imputing this to the many decent Muslims who want to live in peace. That is not what I'm trying to convey.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, they are not the predominant, or at least the most influential element within the Muslim world at the moment. In fact, when I speak of de-Palestinization, I believe this should be done for the benefit of the many decent Muslims who want peaceful coexistence.
And Maurice, just on that, what's your view on what I've asked? And also, do you believe that there's a requirement or a need in Ireland for a more balanced media? That we simply don't have here because maybe of our size as a country. I don't know what it is, but do you believe that there is need that the only way that we can the only way that those who believe in another narrative that's not being heard, that there is no outlet really to hear that in Ireland at the moment? But your view on what I asked first.
Yeah. First of all, they both actually go together. What I'm about to say, there is a need for another medium at the very least, because there is only one narrative on most topics. We know that there has been another narrative on immigration. Now, I'm not saying, not asking whether you agree with the other narrative or not, but it is only because it's quite a large part of the population who want to be heard, number one. And number two, because it affects them at home. Now, the Gaza-Israel or the Palestinian-Israel situation does not really affect anybody at home here. So you're not going to get people that will go out on the streets to march against the people that are already there. There's too many. They would be afraid. Again, it comes down to being afraid. Now, one of the reasons, and again, it comes back to this other medium, and this is why I don't necessarily agree with Marco going to those extremes, Marco, because with narratives like that The bottom line is, in the current situation, even if I was to say you are 100% correct, the point is you wouldn't be heard, because not a radio, not a TV station, no podcast other than that within the bubble is going to hear those views. So there has to be different tactics to get the narrative across. And that's why coming out saying these things, and you may very well be correct, but it won't be heard. So there's no point in having correct information if you can't get it across. The distribution of your thoughts is paramount. Otherwise, it's pointless. So one has to have some sort of strategy or tactic. I think as well, and I've said this to many people at the top of our government, that we don't understand, and Mark, you just said it, we certainly don't understand the Arab mind. We don't. We're Westerners, and it's totally different. And I'm not for 1 minute saying we're better or we're worse, or they're better or worse than us, but we don't understand it. When you look at the Arab countries, there is no true democracy in any of the Arab countries. Would you agree with that, Marco? There really isn't any true democracies.
You're perfectly right. There are no true democracies, and I don't think necessarily that democracy is the reason. I think the problem is we have an ideology. We have peaceful Arab states in the Gulf. They have their own system. I respect that. Not every country in the world has to be a democracy. The point is another. Sorry, Samara, I just want to get the problem is prevarication. Not recognizing that there are other nations, other peoples that have to have their own space. And the problem with Islamism and the jihadi variant of Islam is that it doesn't recognize other ethnic groups, religious groups, as having any sort of legitimacy. Now, with regard to what you said about what I'm saying, I'm speaking in a factual way. I don't consider it extremist or not extremist. I'm speaking on the basis of facts and logic. Now, I do understand your point, and I appreciated what you said at the Oireachtas, and I appreciated your polished approach, and I understood that the metabolism in Ireland isn't ready yet for such morsels. But seeing as we're having a podcast, I think that these are ideas that are worth floating, and for people to try and understand and perhaps elicit different questions than they might otherwise ask.
Yeah.
And by the way, with regard to Medium, I see that what we're doing, many other people are doing, and that many people now have access to the type of information and the type of ideas that we're trying to convey. So I don't see it as quite as black with regard to the media. Now, you did say something very important, and I appreciate that, and I think your observation was very astute. I think it's not just about what you say, but also about how you say it. And I think we've been very contained and moderate in our approach. Nobody's been frothing at the mouth. We're speaking in an analytical way. I don't think anybody's gone off on a rant with non sequiturs. I think we've had a very reasonable and a very calm conversation, respecting, the difference of opinion as well.
I think as well, we're trying to come back to what I was saying about there's no true democratic Arab state. I'm not saying, and I think I said this, that there's nothing wrong with that, because maybe democracy isn't the best. There's absolutely nothing wrong. And we had a situation only about, I think, 2 weeks ago, where the Sheikh Sheikh Wadi al-Jabari from, I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, from Hebron, actually said that he wants to float the idea, because he is the head, he's the tribal head of 900,000 Palestinians, and to float the idea that Hebron, which is in the West Bank, as you know, and other refugee camps in the West Bank and other areas of the West Bank would form various emirates underneath the local sheikh, because there's a lot of families and tribes, as there is in Lebanon, as there is in Gaza, who may take up the mantle, because the PA, as we know, has got a terribly corrupt leadership and really does not. And this is why they've never had elections, because they're afraid they would lose the election to Hamas. So I thought that actually was very interesting, that the Sheikh from Hebron was willing to float that idea. And I think we're going to, at some stage, hopefully, and we'll have to pray for this, that there will be an out-of-the-box solution to this. But whatever the solution is, it certainly means getting rid of or bypassing the corrupt leadership. And it also means a huge de-radicalization of what the mindset of the Palestinian Authority. And I hate to say this, but I have to say it, unfortunately, because this has gone on so long, that there is now a radicalization of a small amount of the Jewish people in Israel, which many of us in the diaspora certainly are not happy with either. And they've also got to be de-radicalized. And it's funny about both sides, they've always got God on their side.
Well, I'd be a little bit more careful with that, Maurice. I happen to know a lot of these people that have been radicalized, and they're not radicalized. This is largely a construct of the Western media, so much so that I believe you're also referring to attacks against Christians in the village of Taiba, which appear to be not quite as founded as they perhaps were thought to have been. Notwithstanding that, they are rare exceptions.
They are.
They are rare exceptions, and qualitatively, we must draw a distinction. An Arab can come into my neighborhood, they come in, they have no problems, they work. That is not the same for a Jew that is going around in Judea and Samaria.
Yes, and you're right to point that out.
You know, I have to be sorry if I'm a little bit sharp on this, but I believe we cannot draw this type of analogy. Of course, there are rogues, but they're exceptions.
Marco, can I ask you this? Can I ask you this, because it is a common theme in Ireland. I don't think Maurice would disagree with me on this. Is that there is a feeling that the Israeli public and the Israeli public, and I'll come to Netanyahu in a minute, but the Israeli public have no feeling one way or the other about the amount of women and children killed in Gaza during this war. Okay, now also Netanyahu here, this is what I'm talking about. This is from here now, from Ireland. Netanyahu is painted as something like Hitler in his approach to this war and the war on seven fronts or whatever. But he's but particularly in Gaza, what do the Israeli people think of the scale of women and children? Even though we can't trust the Hamas figures, no matter whether people say Hamas terrorists are different than the Hamas government.
Right. Eugene, Maurice, wars are tragedies. We would all have rather this hadn't happened. Let's try and cast our minds back. It happened because on October the 7th, these delinquent terrorists invaded Israel. By the way, Israel had pulled out from the Gaza Strip in 2005, mistakenly so, by the way. And I reiterate this all the time, because this is a direct consequence of that. They invaded, they raped, they butchered, they burned, they mutilated, they abducted innocent people. It was, and not only that, they recorded it and they rejoiced, okay? And a significant part of the population of Gaza rejoiced. Let us bear that in mind. Let us bear that in mind, that Hamas were not pulled out of the hat. They were the result of the expression of elections. Okay, we have to bear, notwithstanding that, Israel does everything it can in very difficult situation. Are people aware of what these delinquents have constructed tunnels that stretch for miles, that go well and beyond the metropolitan systems of New York and London? And instead of permitting their citizens to seek refuge in these, they use them as human shields. So first and foremost, the blame for these deaths lies solely in the hands of this delinquent regime, okay? Beyond any shadow of a doubt, okay? And not only that, the blame also lies with those who protect them and who are their apologists. And that is much of the Western media and much of the political class in the West. They cannot wash their hands of this. They have emboldened these terrorists, and they must bear a significant part of the responsibility for the tragedy of these poor children and these innocents. That must also be borne in mind.
Maurice?
Yes, Marky, look, you are correct there. Unfortunately, I've found in the last number of years dealing with politicians around the world that they're reactive, they're not proactive. I've spoken about UNRWA, I've spoken about Iran, I've spoken about Hezbollah, never mind Hamas. I've spoken about the school textbooks, and by and large, I'm speaking to people who have very closed ears because it isn't immediate and it doesn't get them elected next time round.
Right.
And all politics, unfortunately, there's no greater truism than all politics is local.
There is certainly a great deal to what you say, but if they do this, it's because the people have been conditioned to believe this. Politicians don't spring up out of the blue. They latch on to popular sentiment, which is fomented by the media and academia, and also in some of the religious institutions. Let's be perfectly frank. Okay, politicians are an expression. They give expression to popular feeling, and I think that has to be borne in mind. Now, it is absurd. It's absurd because I've mentioned this many times. Palestinism impairs people cognitively. Okay, because we can go back to the beginning. You can tell people, as I mentioned before, that the so-called Palestinians would have had 45% of pre-1967 Israel. You can also mention the fact, and this, bear in mind that when the 1948 War of Independence broke out, Israel was busy absorbing 200,000 survivors of the Holocaust, some of whom were thrown into the front line. A war was not something that the nascent Israeli state needed in 1948. Okay, so this is the absurdity of the mindsets of these people who try to defend Palestinism.
Can I finally turn to just the last part in relation to the bill? U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee accused Ireland of diplomatic intoxication when he gave a sharp rebuke to the draft legislation. Do you? Ireland has a long established friendship with the U.S. Great allies for decades. Is, in your opinions, I'll start with you, Maurice, is this bill in danger of, especially with Donald Trump in office, is this will this bill in any way dent that relationship?
Well, Eugene, the first thing I'll say to you is greater minds than mine have tried to determine what President Trump was going to do in various situations and haven't succeeded. So I really don't know. We know he's volatile. I really don't know. 1 minute it may appear to be impairing relations. The next minute we could be the best of friends. It appeared that when Micheál Martin went over for St. Patrick's Day, that everything was fine, though there has been 1 or 2 articles in the media to say we shouldn't be complacent about that it may not be as good as we think it is. So I don't know, and if I was to give an answer, it would really be guessing. It could, at the end of the day, for President Trump, my guess is that he's going to do what is fiscally correct, or what he believes to be fiscally correct for America, whatever that is. And I'd just like to just say one thing, to come back to Marco, and as an addendum to what he was saying. I think it's worth noting that I saw President Clinton being interviewed just before last Christmas, and you may have seen this clip of him. He was being interviewed about his political career, and he was asked, and I'm paraphrasing, what was the most disappointing event in his career. And the most disappointing was, he said, when he had hoped to make peace with Yasser Arafat and the Israelis, between Yasser Arafat and the Israelis at Camp David, when the Palestinians were getting everything they wanted. In fact, there was about 3% or 3 or 4% more land, and there was going to be swaps of land, and there was going to be, the settlements were going to be sorted where they would get land instead of the settlements, etc. And he was promised by Yasser Arafat that there would be peace deal. And at the last minute, he refused to sign. Yasser Arafat refused to sign. And President Clinton, when he was telling this story, there were tears in his eyes. He was almost crying. He virtually was crying. That was the most disappointing event of his political career.
Marco, on the US relationship with Ireland?
Well, I think Maurice is much better placed to speak about the relationship with Ireland than I am. It's really difficult for me to commit myself either way. Yeah.
Okay.
Maurice is better placed to speak about that.
Okay. So I'll just ask in a word then, just on the bill. I'm just going to ask a word, just one word, yes or no. Is the pushing through of this bill, is it anti-Semitic? Marco.
Well, sorry, Marco, go ahead.
Unequivocally, yes. Now, I have no problem with a person can exercise their democratic right to be anti-Semitic, by the way. That's what democracy is about. But equally, I invoke the right to identify him as such. Yes, I believe it is an anti-Semitic. I believe I'm convinced it's anti-Semitic.
Maurice?
Well, Eugene, again, I think I'm back at the committee answering a yes or a no question. So if I say, I can't answer it as a yes or no because I don't know. I believe it could have that effect, which is what I said at the committee. I certainly don't believe it was motivated by anti-Semitism. I've seen no evidence of that. However, one could see that it is anti-Semitic because it is targeting Jews. It is the first time that Jews have been targeted for a boycott since the Second World War. So it may very well, if it goes through, be perceived as anti-Semitic. But was it motivated by anti-Semitism? I think it was motivated by ignorance, naivety, and and more about anti-Zionism than anti-Semitism. And there's only a very thin line between them both.
And I want to finally say, I suppose, in defense of the IDF, I want to say I looked at two clips today. They weren't on far right media. They were on the Jerusalem Post, and one was a video taken by the Arabic speaker for the Israeli Defense Forces at a GHF feeding area, where all the group of Palestinians, hundreds and hundreds of them, gathered around this station, and you could see the video was taken with an IDF soldier well back thing, and the Palestinians were turning around and cheering the IDF soldiers, actually cheering them. Yes. And I thought that's something that would never be carried in media here. The other one I saw was from direct from a GHF. Again, I saw it on Jerusalem Post. I'm not saying the Jerusalem Post is accurate on everything, but I'm just saying from the point of view of where I saw it. I also saw a spokesperson for the GHF at a particular site where everything was definitely laid out in order for issuing of 2 million meals that particular day. I just want to say that it's important, because that will never be carried here in Ireland. And on that note, I'm going to leave it there. I want to thank Maurice Cohen, who is chair of the Jewish Representative Council in Ireland, and I want to thank you for your time and for staying the course, that you didn't leave, Maurice, and you're very, very good to stay. And I really value your contribution to, and everything you do to improve the narrative about Israel and about the defense of Jewish people in Ireland. I want to say thank you for that. And to Marco, again from the Owl Sod, living in Jerusalem, thank you for your insights, Marco, for what is felt in Israel in relation to how Ireland behaves, how the Ireland elite, because as Maurice says,
indeed,
97% of the Irish people are not anti-Semitic.
Indeed, Indeed, Eugene, you'll forgive me if I interrupt you. I hasten to add that our participation here is motivated by preserving Ireland's good name, because I believe people who engage in this activity are besmirching Ireland's good name. So that is the reason why I express, perhaps sometimes in a forceful way, but I think continuing down this path is to Ireland's detriment, and I think something has to change.
Okay, we'll leave it on that note. From the Green Zone, Conversations with Eugene Doyle. I'll be back here again next Monday. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks indeed to both of you again.
Thank you, Eugene.
Okay.
Good evening, Marco.
Good evening to you, Maurice.